After being gone for a week, my husband's on a 6-hour flight back home, and what better way to surprise him than with some fresh vanilla ice cream and some gooey chocolate brownies. And then my husband walked through the door, so I decided to serve him up some of that brownie and ice cream. This is one of his favorite sweet treats, so I'm excited that he really liked it.
And I've been sitting in my car crying ever since because I never have enough money. And why do I never have enough money? Because when I was a 19-year-old girl, I fell in love. My Mormon faith told me that I was supposed to be a stay-at-home mom. I got married. I started having babies. I dropped out of college. I never had a career. My only jobs that I ever had in life were a waitress at the Olive Garden and managing a pretzel maker in a mall. So I found myself divorced at age 44 just 5 years ago, and within just a few months I was living in my car. While he made about $250,000, he would eventually quit that job so that he wouldn't have to pay alimony and child support. He has only paid alimony one time. Not a day that goes by that I don't wonder why. Why I didn't have a backup plan. Why my kids eating and having stability was dependent on a romantic relationship.
So honestly, I know I'm super late to this specific topic. I mean, I have spoke about trad wives a fair bit on this channel, to be fair, but I haven't really focused in on like the trad wife kind of grift on places like TikTok and kind of framing this idyllic traditional wife lifestyle. And I say traditional wife because that's what it's called, but if you know anything about history, you know being like a wife and mother in a home and your duties only being like looking after your children and cooking and cleaning isn't really true to history, nor is it true to the roles of many wives around the world. Like, I know when I went to rural parts of Vietnam, you see a lot of women who are wives and mothers. They live in these more traditional rural societies and they are out in the fields doing a lot of farm work. And when we talk about like trad wives, we're not actually talking about, you know, that sort of traditionalism, where across the world women have fulfilled this like double role. We're talking about like 1950s white middle class trad wife, where in this era of like abundance for certain groups of people in the United States after the Second World War, you did have this Mad Men society for white middle class and upper class Americans, where the man would go work maybe some corporate office job. You'd have a nice home in the suburbs where your wife would simply just be, you know, wife and mother. And also, of course, there's nothing wrong with that dynamic inherently, because my own mum was a stay-at-home mum. I'm one of 4, and my mum did not work when she had me. She stopped working when she had my older brother, and I've seen that dynamic, which is more like traditional in my own family. My dad has that corporate job. He's the one who went to university. He had a good education. My mum stayed at home, took us to school, cooked and cleaned and all that stuff. So this video isn't shaming people for being stay-at-home parents. And for a lot of people as well, I can totally understand, in the capitalist hellscape we live in, being a stay-at-home parent does sound appealing. Like, what would you rather do? Grind yourself into the ground to make profits for a corporation, or raise your children? When you break it down like that, it seems like a good deal. And they're thinking being a trad wife actually sounds like quite appealing. Well, I get to stay at home, look after like 1 or 2 children while just like living my life. And this is why these TikToks you've kind of been seeing are like quite seductive in that way. But of course, it's also rooted in patriarchy, in that they don't think this should be a choice. This is just your assigned role as a woman, is to be a baby machine who is trapped. And as we're going to get into in this video, the Mormon church are involved in a lot of this stuff, but also just generally conservatives, especially in America, have been talking about like getting rid of no-fault divorce. And basically what a lot of men want with a trad wife is just someone who will be their servant, who cannot leave them. And I've also spoken about this before, but there's, of course, the dark side of being like a 1950s, 60s Mad Men wife, which is never shown in social media, in that it was such a problem that these women back in the day were overdoing prescription drugs to get themselves through the day. The Rolling Stones, one of the biggest bands of all time, actually put out a song called Mother's Little Helper, which is about trad wife stay-at-home mums abusing prescription drugs because they hate their life so much. Because of course back then it's a role a lot of women were forced into without basically having any choice. And that's not the type of stuff you're going to see on trad wife TikTok. But anyway, we're going to expand on that in the video. But also, before we go any further, please check out my social media at the Kavernacle on my personal and my travel Instagram. Also, check out my Threads and Blue Sky page. And if you want to support the channel, check out the Patreon and you can join the Discord server. But like I said, I'm pretty late to this specific TikTok, but there is a person on TikTok called Nara Smith, who I think is like 22, 23. And she makes TikToks where she's wearing like nice clothes, she's all dressed up, and she's basically making food from scratch for her children because that is her primary role in her relationship with her model and Mormon partner. You've probably seen this going viral on TikTok and on Twitter, but I'm just going to play you one of these videos to show you like the aesthetic.
After being gone for a week, my husband's on a 6-hour flight back home. And what better way to surprise him than with some fresh vanilla ice cream and some gooey chocolate brownies. I started making my custard for my ice cream with some milk, vanilla, sugar, and some eggs. I combined my egg yolks with my sugar and then slowly put some of the warm milk in there just to get it warm, and then added it to the rest of my milk. Strained all the vanilla out and then let it come down to room temperature before transferring it over to the fridge. In the meantime, I started on my brownie batter, mixed all of my dry ingredients, and then added my wet ones, which were some eggs, some oil, and some water. I then combined that mixture with my dry ingredients, gave it a really good mix, and then transferred that over to my loaf pan before putting that in the oven. Then I pulled out my custard and churned it. When it hit the consistency of soft serve, I transferred it over to a separate container to pop it in the freezer for a couple hours. At this point, my brownie was good to go, so I pulled it out of the oven and let it cool completely. And then my husband walked through the door, so I decided to serve him up some of that brownie and ice cream. This is one of his favorite sweet treats, so I'm excited that he really liked it.
So just in this one TikTok about making your husband a brownie, you can see why this appeals to people and why people want it. And it is literally like something from Mad Men in that she's making this dish like she's in the 1950s and 60s, in that she is going out of her way to make this stuff from scratch. Like, yeah, making people brownies is really common. Making people like homemade ice cream for the brownies just for your husband getting home sounds like a patriarchal dream from the 1950s. Your wife eagerly waiting for you to return from the big city, from your commute, and she has apple pie waiting on the windowsill. And you'll see in a lot of these videos just like the aesthetic and what she talks about, like making her kids like breakfast, but it's always like very extravagant because in this like Pleasantville existence that she's depicting on TikTok, she literally has nothing better to do. Nothing better to do than sit around cooking extravagant meals from scratch, which maybe like her children won't even appreciate because, yeah, they are very young kids, so why do you even need to do that? Personally, to me, it seemed like a waste of time, but I think that's kind of like the point, is that like everything in her life is taken care of, so all she has to do is like serve her children and her husband with these nice things. And I'm not like necessarily like hating on these people. If you go on the husband's TikTok, it's kind of like the similar thing where he's just talking about like working or exercising or doing other stuff, and it shows them like raising their children together. It doesn't look like he's like an absent father or anything from, you know, this idyllic TikTok life they're depicting. We don't really know anything about their real life. But people had a lot of criticism when I initially saw these going viral like a couple months ago. And a lot of people were saying it gives Mormon vibes. Because although a lot of Christian groups in America do have a reputation, having these more like, I don't know, baby boomer type relationships going on today, it seems more common in Mormonism that women don't actually work in this religion as much as other religions. Now, Rolling Stone actually covered these two people, and I just want to read it for you quick. So, meet the hot young trad wife making everyone on the internet mad. Nara Smith and her husband, Lucky Blue Smith. So, Smith is a model and a lifestyle influencer. Some outlets say she's 23, others say she's 28. who has about 2.7 million followers on TikTok. Born Nara Pellman, she is of German and South African descent, marrying Lucky in 2020, and they have 2 children, and they're expecting a third. Lucky has been a prominent influencer for some time, reaching the apex of his fame in the 2010s Tumblr era. It hasn't been until relatively recently that his wife has received the same level of attention thanks to her TikTok. This content isn't political, nor does it advocate for a specific agenda, yet many comments have accused Smith of using her platform to promote the trad wife lifestyle, particularly in light of the fact that her husband, Lucky, is Mormon and was raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The specifics of Smith's relationship with Mormonism are unclear. Though I was unable to verify online rumours that she had converted, she has responded affirmatively to comments asking if she self-identifies as a Mormon, and she has obliquely referred to studying scripture and the Book of Mormon in her content. Unlike Lucky, who in September 2023 wrote a lengthy Instagram post promoting my testimony of the Book of Mormon and Jesus Christ, she does not speak openly about what, if any, relationship she has with the church, other than to quell other speculation. Smith's own religious affiliation aside, there's a well-documented history of women in the Mormon church, particularly young attractive mothers, wielding their influence to promote values that are traditionally associated with the church to a secular audience, even if they're not explicitly promoting the religion itself. Mormon women have been long represented in the influencer space. Historically, they've been discouraged from seeking full-time employment, with the church urging them to lean into roles as mothers and homemakers. Though this has changed in recent years, we're taught from an early age to document our lives, and especially when it comes to Mormon women, the whole medium is tailor-made for crafting and DIY and sewing on all of those homemaker activities. Heather Armstrong, an ex-Mormon who is also now a blogger. It's not to say the church isn't aware of these women's popularity. Over the years, I've spoken to many momfluencers who belong to the church who have shared that they will receive emails from the church requesting they promote various initiatives. Others have been known to post sponsored content for the church or give away copies of the Book of Mormon, and church-owned corporations have published books by Mormon influencers. So I am focusing heavily on the Mormon aspects, but even though Mormonism is an even weirder religion than most, Abrahamic religions, at the same time, this can apply to plenty of conservative Abrahamic societies throughout the entire world. It's not just relegated to American Mormons, but I just think it's an interesting case study because they fit in so nicely with this Western trad wife aesthetic, and that's on purpose as well. But just a small note about Mormon women as well. So how many Mormon women work outside the home? The answer hinges on what we mean by work. If it's full-time, then no. Mormon women are only 60% as likely to work full-time as women nationally, but part-time is a bit different. The Mormon church has long placed an emphasis on the family, and leaders have often encouraged women to stay at home with their children, so it's not surprising that the number of Mormon women in the workforce is lower than the nation as a whole. ARIS data shows that only 25% of Mormon women in the US work full-time, compared to 39% of all women. The percent of Mormon women who work part-time, on the other hand, is higher, 23% compared to 14%, and they're also more likely to describe themselves as housewives, 26% compared to 13% nationally. So also in the research, in Utah, only 8.3% of Mormon women complete a graduate education versus 17.5% of non-Mormon women. Outside of Utah, only 7% of Mormon women get an advanced degree versus 12.9% of non-Mormon women. So just responding to some of those numbers, it's pretty clear, the Mormon church, among other Christian groups, tell women, the highest purpose in life and the way you serve God is by just raising your kids and raising your family. Because a lot of religion, although it's funny because how much, corporate enterprise the Mormon church actually owns, especially in a place like Utah, a lot of religions really talk a good game about anti-commercialism and how that doesn't fulfill a void in your life. It's all about your religion. It's all about your family. That's the way you, serve God. It's not about the material possessions, which, like with most religious people, they're obviously hypocritical in that way. So that's how they convince a lot of women that, you've got to just do that. You have to fulfill these very traditional gender roles. Now, of course, there are Mormon women who do work career jobs and stuff, but it's obviously clearly more encouraged in that community. And that's why the momfluencer thing is so good, because they can fit it in with their trad wife lifestyle. So if that Nara Smith is actually following the Mormon religion along with her husband, then she does both. She does the Mormon trad wife stuff, and she's an influencer as well, so that's no like real problem for people in the Mormon church. So obviously you hope people in these relationships, like my own parents, you hope there's no coercion there, you hope both of them are happy in these roles. You hope a stay-at-home parent wants to do that with their life and they don't feel like they're forced to. But there is, of course, especially in like very patriarchal communities, a much darker side, and that is creating a situation that is ripe for financial abuse and trapping women in terrible relationships, because if you drum into their head that they should get married young and have children young and forsake their education and forsake any type of career, then you're adding that element to if they want to leave you one day. Already divorce is looked down upon in the Mormon and other Christian communities, but even if you get a divorce, what happens next? And especially if you have children, like sure, in most divorces, if you are a stay-at-home parent and you raise these kids, you are going to get some sort of settlement, usually. You are going to get some financial assistance, usually. But it's normally not enough that you're never going to have to work again. So you're going to get thrown back into the workplace. So although with that Nara Smith, you see this idyllic trad wife lifestyle, well, what if one of them wants a divorce one day? And she has the social media career to fall back on, but there's plenty of people who fulfill a similar role who don't have that. And then suddenly, you know, you've lost the family structure, you're thrown back into the world. And what are your prospects? And if you don't get a decent settlement, or if, you know, your housing costs cost most of the money you get, then what are you going to do? And that's why it always depresses me when I'm reading like the relationship subreddit, or I'm reading regretful parents. It seems like one problem that constantly comes up, and it is Reddit, so it's an American dominated thing, is American Christians having children and getting married very, very young, in their early 20s, then realizing they're not compatible, and then their whole life they built up in this family unit crumbling around them, and then they have to face the reality of the world where they don't have much employment history, they never got a good education, so they're like 45 trying to compete with younger people getting like minimum wage jobs and stuff. So it's just a lifestyle you never want to advertise to people, even if people genuinely want to be a parent, like a stay-at-home parent. And I got no problem with that at all. Again, I always think you should wait until you've got your education, you've worked a little bit and lived your actual life. And that's why I think people shouldn't be doing these things in their early 20s. I'd say late 20s is probably a better time. And of course, on the Mormon angle as well, it can turn into a bit of a nightmare. So this TikTok by Life Take Two was going viral also a couple months ago. And she was raised in the Mormon faith, and she was influenced by the pressure of that society in this ultra patriarchy where she played like the trad wife, and she went to being married to a rich person who cared for all her needs, and she had like this lavish lifestyle, to having basically nothing because she gave up her life at a very young age, and her whole financial security relied on her being married to this person. And once they were no longer around, then she was thrown right back into the real world. And because she'd been a stay-at-home parent, and as she details here, she never even had her own bank account, that really screwed up her prospects after she left that marriage. So listen to her talk about it for a bit.
I want to start this video by saying that I'm not asking for money, and I'm not asking for sympathy. What I'm asking for is, if you are a young 14, 16, 21-year-old girl, listen up. I drove to the grocery store. I need to grab some milk and bread and a couple things, flipped open the bank app on my phone, and I've been sitting in my car crying ever since, because I never have enough money. And why do I never have enough money? Because when I was a 19-year-old girl, I fell in love. My Mormon faith told me that I was supposed to be a stay-at-home mom. I got married. I started having babies. I dropped out of college. I never had a career. I didn't even have a bank account. I should have said that in the beginning. I never had a bank account. He would give me little envelopes of cash to go grocery shopping with. All of the money went into his bank account. Nothing was under my name. I got a piano, and I got a free house to live in, and I got groceries. So I found myself divorced at age 44 just 5 years ago, and within just a few months I was living in my car while he made about $250,000. He would eventually quit that job so that he wouldn't have to pay alimony and child support. He has only paid alimony one time ever in the 5 years since we've been divorced. Once ever. And so I ended up, my first job after my divorce was $11 an hour, 4 hours a day, working as an assistant to a school teacher in an elementary school. I made $44 a day. For 24 years, I lived in $1 million homes. I vacationed all over the world. I spent my summers in Hawaii. I could buy myself $500 jeans, diamond tennis bracelets. We had boats and RVs, and it never bothered me once that my financial security was dependent on that man being in love with me. I never realized that him liking me or not liking me or finding me sexy or attractive or interesting determined whether or not my children could eat, whether or not I could buy myself a fucking jug of milk and a loaf of bread. I've worked 7 days a week since my divorce 5 years ago, which is why I'm covered in paint and looking like crap. I have no retirement. I have no savings, no education, no resume. I was almost a straight A student throughout all of my education. I went to college at age 17. I had dreams for my future. I'm working so hard to get myself out of just perpetual side hustle hell. There's not a day that goes by that I don't wonder why. Why I didn't have a fucking backup plan. Why my kids eating and having stability was dependent on a romantic relationship. Why nobody told me to put money in the bank. Why nobody told me, don't have babies until you have an education and some experience. Don't have so many kids. I wish somebody had told me. And I think I need to do an entire trad wife sequel, because you can be happy and rich and loving your life like Ballerina Farm until the guy walks out. I just don't want one more woman to DM me, comment, send me their stories, cry to me about how hard it is for them to support their families, and I am so tired of living my own story. We have to make this stop. Raise your daughters to be financially independent. Focus on their futures and educations just as much as you focus on your sons. I wish that someone had done that for me.
So why obviously that is interesting for the trad wife stuff is this person for decades had this type of lifestyle that everyone is now advertising. But if you looked at her throughout that period and you saw the wealth, and she's talking about they basically had everything they wanted, you think, oh, that's great. You're a more traditional wife, you have a lot of money, your life looks great. But then it can all crumble in 1 second because you're so dependent on this man. And like she was outlining, because he doesn't want to pay child support and he's getting around that, then you're screwed basically as well. And like she was saying, because everything was in his name, she doesn't have any history for anything, right? Think about trying to buy a house one day, right? And you've had no bank account for most of your life, no record of employment, nothing. So like she was saying, it's all dependent on that relationship being sustainable for the future. But like she was also saying in that video, you should just wait. You should just live your life first. You should just not be so dependent on someone else, because something bad can happen, whether that be divorce, whether that be maybe someone potentially dying, and then what are you going to do, right? You have no independence. And also what these situations lead to, not that she talked about this in this video, is financial abuse and obviously economic cohesion in these relationships, which usually goes with other forms of abuse as well. And even by the way she was describing their relationship, in my opinion, she probably was economically abused if she's just getting these little envelopes and maybe one-off purchases and stuff where the husband controls all of the money. It obviously gives him disproportionate power in the whole relationship because he is making all of the decisions and he has power over all of the finances, which it seems like from him not paying child support, he just kept for himself. But if you view it in a trad wife mindset, if you think, no, actually, as a woman, it's your duty, not like part of your job or responsibility, it's your duty to look after these kids and be completely selfless and give away your whole life for them, then you feel like all that money you've earned is actually just for you because your wife didn't work a real job. She has to look after the kids. So even with more liberal feminism, they don't like the trad wife stuff because they say it's a choice, right? If you want to be a trad wife, then yeah, go be a trad wife. But with feminism, you should be able to choose. But obviously the more problematic aspect is within patriarchy and more hardcore patriarchal societies is that a lot of these women have no choice. or their choices are very, very limited, and they're expected by their community to fulfill this role. And like I'm saying, maybe this is becoming a bit more attractive because of the financial circumstances of the world right now, like gross wage stagnation, people realizing more and more that, yeah, your work is bullshit. 80% of jobs mean nothing, and ultimately you're just generating profit for richer individuals, right? So in that, when we all realize it, the thought of being Nara Smith and staying at home and just baking cookies for your husband and children while he takes care of the hard work at the office, that might sound appealing, because if we have one life on Earth, why don't we do something meaningful? And if we can't be like a doctor, if we can't be like an NHS nurse, if we can't be like a firefighter or something, then raising the next generation seems like a pretty honourable thing and something that brings meaning to your life, rather than working like some crappy office job for, I don't know, 40 years and then retiring. But then if you're doing this under the conditions of like people in the Mormon community, then it's just such a massive risk generally that this is going to be sustainable, because you're giving up your entire life, autonomy and independence relatively, to be this stay-at-home mother and wife. And if one day something goes really wrong, your options are very, very limited. As that former Mormon person outlined for us perfectly, the dangers of being a trad wife, no matter how much you might enjoy that lifestyle, no matter how much you might actually have had a good experience with it while it was happening, there's always the risk it might end. So that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.